So hello everyone, both here and in cyberspace, wherever you may be. A few months ago, a fellow came to see me, and though I'd heard a similar question before, but the way he phrased it remained with me, and thus I'm sharing it here. He basically said, I don't have any words, I just feel drained. And what can I do? He'd come to a class or two of mine here, and he thought that maybe I could help. And after reviewing briefly his life schedule and so on, just to see what is draining him, so I suggested a counterintuitive advice. Usually if someone shares with you they're drained, and they have a lot overwhelming them, you would think that if you're going to advise them, it would be good to look at their schedules, what are the things they must do and what are the optional things, and try to cut out some of the stuff, some of their activities, so they can feel lighten the load. But instead, to his surprise, and maybe to mine as well, I said to him, actually, I think you should add a few things in your day. And that's what I'd like to discuss here this evening. That, we really don't know how much we're capable of. Because you see, everyone sees at times when you think that you're not capable of doing more, and there's, God forbid, a crisis, a certain situation, you suddenly realize you're able to get a lot more done than you think. So the question is, how much pressure is needed to really get a person to perform at their best, to be at their excellent. They say you want to get something done, you give it to a busy person. Why is that? Because a person who's not busy, generally their attitude is probably more lackadaisical, more complacent. So therefore anything you give them is also going to go into that same category. Someone who's really busy and is getting things done is usually someone that you can trust that is going to get whatever it is done. At the same time, it's obviously we only have 24 hours in the day. So how is it possible, therefore, that some people simply can get so much done and not feel overwhelmed, and other people do much less and feel completely overburdened? So look, just a simple example. If someone offered you 100 pounds of stones, just plain stones, to carry across the room, if you carry it, it'll be yours. Most of us wouldn't be interested. Why would you exert yourself for 100 pounds of stones? What do you have from that? But if someone offered you 100 pounds of diamonds, you would not only jump at the opportunity, you would ask for 200 pounds if possible. Now 100 pounds of stones don't weigh more than 100 pounds of diamonds. But the value is what overshadows the exertion, the effort. And then there's the motivation, so you're going to put your effort to it because you see the reward. What does this tell us? It tells us that sometimes what we think is a burden is only because we don't see any benefits in it. If we see the benefits, the burden becomes either no burden at all, or it just simply pales in comparison and becomes insignificant in comparison to the gain, the reward. And in that context, as we shall discuss, human being, we are all created to be productive individuals. When we're not productive, we don't feel good about it. Even people who don't need to work. Let's say they've been blessed, if you call it a blessing, someone providing for them. So the Talmud says that is called nemed chsufa. Nemed chsufa means bread of shame. It's a human being by nature, a healthy human being. If you get something as a gift, yes, it's nice to get gifts, but if it becomes your life becomes dependent on other people's gifts, there's something about it that's shameful. It embarrasses us, humiliates us. Yes, many of us would love to have that, but try it out for a while. The price that you pay for that is your own dignity and your own achievement. You never even know what you can achieve. But at the same time, we also want to all have easy lives. So how do we balance these elements? And above all, as I said, being the topic is being drained, How do you fit that into the whole picture when you are overwhelmed? I mean, shouldn't we just take a vacation, empty our lives of all our activities, and try to, as I said, lighten the load? But as we shall see, it's far more complicated than that, because it's not about the load. It's about who we are and why we're doing what we're doing. And that's much harder to look at than just to say, okay, you know what, yes, if I have 500 pounds, let me just take off 250 pounds and then I'll just have a lighter life. It doesn't work that way. Because some of the greatest things in life take the most effort. And if you free yourself of those burdens, you may then be missing the most important things in life. How much work goes into, for example, a healthy relationships and love? It may not be physical exertion, although in some cases that may also be the case, but it's mental, emotional, psychological exertion. So many things that are extremely important in life take a lot of energy from us. The challenge, of course, is, and the most difficult part of this is, as I've always mentioned, is that we're already in midlife, meaning we're already driving at 90 miles an hour, and it's very difficult to stop the vehicle. So, of course, if we could train our children from the earliest of ages to create that balanced type of life, and they enter into their adult life with that type of perspective, it's one thing. We already, call it screwed up, messed up, whatever you want to call it, have already our lives, so to speak, and our issues. And it's very difficult to tinker with, because you don't want to change it all, you don't want to disrupt your life. At the same time, some things are working, some things are not working. Which, of course, is the real challenge, is how do you look at yourself objectively and really see, what fits in, what doesn't fit in. So that's that classic story they tell about, I've shared it here, with the guy was giving a class in time management. So he had a classroom, and he was explaining the idea. One day he comes in with a experiment. I'll show them an experiment. Comes in with a big empty aquarium and 4 bags, 4 big sacks. And then he says to the class, so is this aquarium, everyone look at it, what do you see? Everyone unanimously, it's an empty shell, an empty aquarium. He takes out bag number 1, has several large stones, and he places them into the aquarium. He fills it up as much as possible, big boulders. And he asked the class, would you call this aquarium full? Some said yes, some said not. We get a whole description, of course, what depends what you mean by full. It's all relativity theory. Like they say, the Jewish relativity theory, Jigna Schuchmacher, those Yiddish comics, and social satirists say that the Jewish relativity theory, besides Einstein's, is that 3 hairs on your head aren't much, but 3 hairs in the soup. So some of the class said it's full, some say it's not so full. Fine. He opens up bag number 2. What's behind door number 2 is a bunch of pebbles. And he pours the pebbles into the aquarium, and of course they fill all the crevices where the big boulders were, and now he fills it to the top. Is it full? Now, of course, if you see 2 more bags, you realize there's something going on, but it's just based on what your observation. So more people said, more students said yes, and now it's full. Bag number 3 is fine gravel. Fine gravel, which is even finer and almost like dust, and that fills the last pockets. Is it full now? Again, almost everyone said full, but then he took out bag number 4, in which he had a few pitchers of water, and he poured the water into the aquarium till it spilled over. Okay, now basically, obviously, we're not talking about on the subatomic level or on an energy level. On a physical level, there's really nothing more you can put in there. So, what's the lesson from all of this? He asked the class, and of course, everyone simply said, "Well, you just showed us that no matter how full you think your day is, you could always fit something more in. Here you thought the boulders, you put in pebbles, gravel, water. So you could always fit more in. Don't ever think if you organize yourself, you could fit. Like today they have the evolution phenomenon, these closet organizers. It's become a whole science. You can take a space and turn it into something like magical. So you can do a lot more than you think you can do. That was what the whole class suggested. And he said no. That you don't need me to teach you. That's obvious, at least the most, or to some. The lesson I wanted to show you with this exercise was that if you don't put the boulders in first, you're never going to get them in. That's what he said. If you don't put your priorities first, and you fill your life with the pebbles, and with the gravel, and with the water, you're never going to get the boulders in. Try. Because once you put, if I did it the other way around, you put the water first, and then he would never be able to get the boulders. The boulders are the priorities. The end. There's the means and there's the end. And that's the real secret to time management. See, we think linearly. As linear thinkers, we think in terms, okay, if I have 24 hours in the day, or have 10 hours in the day, or 9 hours, whatever you consider your day, I'll organize myself and fit more in. What you're really just doing is just reshuffling the deck instead of thinking out of the box. Everyone likes to talk about thinking out of the box. There's two conditions to think out of the box. Firstly, it's not just be cool that you think out of the box. First of all, you have to have a box. If you can't define your box, it's very hard to think out of your box. Some people I know just thinking out of the box or out of the bun, as Taco Bell, I think, has stolen that line. And that's number one. And number two, think out of the box. To think out of the box or act out of the box. Most people, frankly, are conformists. It's not so simple to think out of the box. Yeah, you may have once in a while a dream, a fantasy. That doesn't mean thinking out of the box. Thinking out of the box means that you actually can implement another way of looking at things in life. We hardly can do that about our own lives, let alone about bigger things. Einstein, when he came up with his discoveries, and he did it as a postal clerk, he said, and many have said, that had he been a conventional physicist in the laboratory, he would not have been able to come up with these ideas. It had to be coming from outside, as he calls it. You want to change the system, it has to be outside the system. A system can never change itself, because you're part of the system. The Talmudic statement for that is, Ein chavish matir atzmei. A person in fetters cannot free themselves. It means if you're tied up, all bound up, you can't free yourself. If you're in a pit, someone else has to throw you a rope. That's even on a physical level. Now, psychologically, it's far more difficult, because psychologically, your efforts of trying to free yourself can be the efforts that actually are enslaving you. How would you know? We have a thing called, a word that you probably all are familiar with, called subjectivity. We're subjective. As subjective creatures, we come up with solutions that are based on our subjective. So if you're the problem and you're coming up with a solution, would you trust someone that's the cause of the problem to give you their solution? But we don't see it on ourselves because it's blind spots, we minimize. That's called bias, self-love, the comfort zone. However, this doesn't mean we're bad people. As a matter of fact, the key to all growth is not becoming objective. No human being can become on their own objective. It's recognizing that you're subjective. What do you do when you have a blind spot? So they build a mirror. Let's say in a car, even with mirrors, there's always one blind spot. The one on the bottom, to the right, to the back right of your automobile. And no mirror has figured out they can't figure out that little spot, which has caused quite a few accidents, is a blind spot. It's interesting, with all our technology, you can't figure out how to make a mirror, but for some reason, maybe it's a lesson that God is showing us that there are blind spots that you really can't overcome. Not like the guy that once told me, he has all his problems in his life, and then he said to me, he's done everything to solve them, and he's coming to me because he wants me to help him with some magic. Like, maybe to remove the spell, or maybe it's from some reincarnation. So I said to him, how do you know you covered all the usual suspects? He says, I did. I know it. So I said to him, you have any blind spots? He says, yes, but I know what they are. So I told him the story with the mirror in the car. I said, no, there's no such thing. If it's a blind spot, you don't know what they are. Yeah, you may know that you have them, but you don't know what they are, because then it's not a blind spot. The point is not to criticize us as human beings. It means it's part of our challenge is to recognize there's certain instincts we may have, certain approach, which is great, especially if it works. But we all have to know we are ultimately mortals. We have our weaknesses, we have our biases. And recognizing that is actually a strength, not a weakness. It's recognizing. And that's why we go to an advisor, to a mentor. Why would you go to an attorney or to an accountant or an expert in any particular field? Why not just read up on it? Because that person has number one experience, but more importantly, they also have objectivity. They look at it without any bias eye. So it's about like what Hillel said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? It always begins with self-responsibility. We're not talking about using someone as a crutch to solve our problems. But at the same time, if I'm only for myself, what am I? Which means the importance of having friends, having counsel, colleagues, mentors, authorities. However, the Mishnah says it beautifully. Aseh lecha rav, appoint for yourself a mentor, and knei lecha chaver, and acquire for yourself a friend. A mentor is more of an authority, more someone that's more experienced than you. A friend has the advantage that they relate to you more. You can discuss it with them. They give you more advice. A mentor or an authority would be someone that you want a little more authoritative position, not just another opinion. And we need both in our lives. We need those that are close and relate to us, and we can discuss it in like a sounding board. And then we need those that have a little more experience or knowledge, and we actually want them to make a decision. Not the decision for us, but to say, I have this problem, I'd like to have a ruling. What would be your verdict, so to speak? And you need both. One without the other doesn't really work. Obviously, it would be great to have someone that's both what they call a Talmud chaver, or they say sometimes a Rav, a teacher that's also a friend. But usually, the advantage of one is precisely they're not your friend, so they can give you a more so-called stronger or more a ruling. Whereas a friend has the advantage of being comfortable. You can talk it through. You can look at it. Sometimes you just want someone to tell you what it is and then work it out. So the key thing is to understand that we are not able to really always see, especially in the personal areas of our lives, the choices we've made, the ones that we're already invested in. The ones we're not invested in, it's one thing. But once you're invested, you're already living your life today, tomorrow. You have your routines, your habits. It's very difficult for you to see how much of that is really necessary, how much isn't, and how it all fits in. And I'm not trying to suggest we start second-guessing ourselves. It's just a matter of being able to be honest, sincere, and ultimately it's your life. So you want to have the best. If you want to have the best, you don't want to find out years later that you were the biggest enemy, your own worst enemy, because you chose not to want to look at something. So we stand in the month of Elul. It's the last month of the Hebrew year before Tishrei. It's exactly what it's about. It's a month of accountability, of auditing yourself. Introspection. Elul means to search. It's an Aramaic word, to search. Soul search. And part of the process is what I'm describing here. So to go back to that story I told, what the stones are. What should be the stones? What are the priorities? It's a good question. What are the priorities? And if you don't have them in your life, and you have all the other smaller details, the minutia, can you even get those boulders in? Which makes it far more complicated. It's one thing they may be being disregarded by the details and so on. So this is all part of an answer to answer a question. How does one free themselves? When you feel drained, it's not just a question of how do you just unload, or how do you free yourself of some of your activities. It's really looking at the whole picture and looking at your own investment and your abilities and so on. So there's an interesting expression in the Talmud that says there was a group called a city called Uchlasa de Mechuzah, which means a community in a place called Mechuzah, which was they were hard workers. The Talmud says in general, when you hire someone, you pay them to do work. So you can make a deal with them. Listen, when you're doing the work, I pay you by the hour. When you're not doing the work, I don't pay you. The Uchlasa de Mechuzah, the Talmud says, were so accustomed to work that they had actually pain and loss and grief when they didn't work. So if you hired someone from that city, from that community, you had to pay them for time off, because for them that was more painful not to work than to work. They were just that type of community, which is interesting insight psychologically. What that means exactly. I'm not talking about necessarily that they were workaholics and that and so on, but rather that was they were just natural for them was to produce, and to stop them from producing was for them more costly than for them to work. So they tell the analogy of this guy, this king or prince, who had everything, a spoiled brat, And he was once traveling, and he sees, on his way back to his palace, to his king's father's palace, he sees a very elegant movement in the field. One of the fields, he sees a trained farmer is what's the words? He's using his scythe to cut the thresh and cut the harvest. But the way he was doing it caught his attention. He thought he was a kind of poet, like a type of artist. It looked so artistic and so beautiful. So he went over to this fellow and says, I like those movements. It's just so coordinated. It looked like a dance to him, a dance in the field. And being that he can buy anything, he said to him, how much you make a day here? So he said, okay, I make so much. He says, I'll pay you 10 times as much just to come to the palace. And whenever I need entertainment, I just want you to make these moves for me. Take the same equipment, and it won't be. You won't have to work under the hot sun. You don't even have to work hard at all. You just have to make these moves, and that's it. Farmer thought he was a little nuts, the guy, but hey, listen, the money was worth it. And why not? Let's try it out. Obviously, what happened? It's an analogy given. What happened is that after one day, he quit. And the prince came to him and said to him, why'd you quit? I'm paying you 10 times as much as what you're making out there. You don't have to work hard. You don't have to even deal with the weather, with the elements and so on. He says, yeah, but I don't feel any product coming out of my work here. And I just don't have the motivation to stand there. I don't care how much money you pay me. I don't see the fruit of my labor. Which touches on the essence of what human beings are like. There's an expression, Adam la'omo yavalad. It means a human being was created to toil. Which I know can be depressing when you hear it for the first time. In other words, I thought that just I had no choice because I had to make some money. Now you tell me that God created us this way. And yes, that's what it says. Adam la'omo. So initially, yes, you'd say, hey, why couldn't God be nicer and just create us not as needing to toil, created to toil? We have to toil because we have no choice. For example, look at what happened in the Garden of Eden. After Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, so midah keneged midah, which is tit for tat, in a sense, cause and effect. What were one of the consequences of that? That Adam, from now on, the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. Meaning, before they ate from the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve would not have had the pain of life. Eve would have been preserved of the pain of childbearing, pain of bearing children, birth, and all that comes with that. All the biological elements and the difficulties and the discomforts and so on. And Adam would have prevented, had he not eaten from the tree, having to go sweat the sweat of his brow to work hard. So you think when you read this, I remember once teaching it, just a verse, someone said, hey, that's great. I wish when are we going to get back to that type of life, where you can just hang around in the Garden of Eden, look at the trees, good, fine, you won't eat from the tree of knowledge, but there's a tree of life, and there's a lot of other beautiful stuff there. Paradise. What do we think about when we think about paradise? You just kick off your shoes and you relax. It's like being on the beach. That's what's paradise, right? No work at all. That's not correct at all. And that's also, if I dispel some myths here tonight, I hope it doesn't disturb, because many people, that's what they're waiting for. I can't wait to go to paradise. And we do nothing. No. So the Talmud has an interesting question. It says that a man was created to toil. Man meaning human being. Omo. So the Talmud asks, what does Omo mean? And it says there are three opinions. One says Amal Torah, to work hard, to struggle in studying Torah. Another one says Amal Sicha, the effort in Sicha means to speak, but it means prayer. It says when Isaac went out to the field, Lasuach Basada, to speak in the field means he went to pray. So it's the effort of emoting through words in a deeper spiritual way. And the third opinion is Amal Malacha, the toil of work, the literal meaning. Work, that we toil, we work hard, labor. Being that Labor Day is on Monday, it's obviously fitting discussion. Like anything in the United States, it's called Labor Day, is the day when nobody labors. What? Like it's the beginning of the labor season, or whatever the reason it's Labor Day. I think it's some other quirky reason. But So, once upon a time, I think I wrote an article once about this, labor and hard work was seen as something for the masses, for the inferior masses, the Greeks, and the Romans as well. So hard work was for the servants. The people who are the elite, the enlightened, were people who spent most of their time thinking, conceiving, discussing, socializing, not involved in the mundane efforts of labor. And you can look this up today. We all become very wise through Google and Wikipedia and so on. Whether you call Rabbi Google or Professor of Wikipedias. So you see the whole history, how labor began to become something that became valued. Very much part of Calvinism. They call the Protestant work ethic, where they began to elevate work as being a divine entity. But that goes very counter to earlier thinkers, especially the Greeks and Aristotle in that period. But you could understand why labor was considered to be inferior, because labor is for those that toil, the shoemakers, the goldsmiths, the metal workers, and so on, who prepare the world. Aristotle wrote, they are there to make the world a more comfortable place for the philosopher kings, for the intellectuals, for the thinkers. That was the way it was conceived. As I said, over the generations, work became far more so-called elevated. But it's interesting, because if you really look in the Bible, and plenty discussed in the Bible, and also you can say work is a curse. Because Adam, as I said, the sweat of our brow, that's a curse. That is an aberration. If things would have been normal and healthy, they would have been in the Garden of Eden, doing what? La'avda l'sham, serving God, and studying and praying and dealing with their spiritual matters. Most of their day would be involved in spirituality. Very little effort in the need for survival needs. Yet at the same time, you look in Judaism does not see work as being an inferior thing. It sees work, I just said, Adam la'almi avol, man was created to work. It sees work as being an opportunity to also elevate the world, as I mentioned, to being productive. So what is going on? So as I said, the concept of paradise and vacation in general, in our limited minds, is actually quite a distortion. A human being, by nature, because of our souls, abhors, like that uchus the mechuzah that I mentioned, abhors idle time. The fact that we've mastered the art of leisure and idleness is simply because of the comforts of our time. Does not necessarily mean it's healthy. You could attribute it to laziness. You could attribute to no effort needed. Nothing in nature except the human being is that way. You ever imagine bees or ants or any species suddenly decide, you know what, we're taking off for a week? They don't see that as a virtue. They see their role as doing what they have to do, and they're fulfilled by it. If you could interview them. It's only human beings that have mastered this ability, what we call downtime, do nothing. What does that mean, to do nothing? What does it do to the soul and the psyche? Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting a person has to be the hard labor work, as you'll soon see. The question is the productivity. So, that point I made earlier, that bread of shame, there's a Talmudic statement that states that Adam reitze b'kav shalei yosem mitisha kavin shel chaveri. A person desires, has more pleasure in $1, essentially, that they make, $1 that they earn through their own efforts, than 9 that they're given as a gift. Now you can buy a lot more with 9 times as much when you're given $9 as opposed to 1, or 9 million or 1 million. But when it comes to the quality, you'll also blow it faster because you haven't earned it. Whereas if you earn it, you appreciate it. Qualitatively speaking, the $1 is more valuable. So the reason for this is because we were created to be creators, not to be takers, but to be givers. And the nature of a giver is to produce. Think a moment. Just if you can, step back and think for a moment. What would it be like if we were never giving anything? If we never felt we could give? That you just were a taker. Now most people live their lives as takers. But psychologically, that you never illuminate, you never teach, you never inspire, you never educate anybody. What do you think you'd be like if you came to that conclusion that you're that type of person? I would submit that it's one of the most horrible thing a human being can come to its sense. Much worse than almost any other thing. Why is that? Because we have consciousness, we have awareness, and one of the greatest things is actualizing that part of ourselves, our potential. And it's most expressed in how we give to others. Imagine people didn't know how to love children, didn't know how to give unless they got something in return. So yes, practically speaking, as we shall discuss, we sometimes gravitate to our lowest common denominator, the easiest approach. But that doesn't mean it's the healthiest approach, and it doesn't mean we're very proud of it either. On the other hand, what do you feel like after you've spoken to someone, they call you up and they say, or they send you an email, you really inspired me, you're giving me strength. It's one of the most gratifying things to hear that. And not for the ego, it's because you feel like you've produced something, that you have some value. Well, I submit that when we're born, our souls know this, and healthy parents reinforce it. So if you hear this message again and again as you grow into an adult, then you have that confidence. You have the courage to take on anything because you know, I have what to give. Yes, we live in a world where we need to survive, so obviously we need to also be able to acquire and to purchase and to take. But we don't define by being takers, we're defined by being givers. Even though we also need to take care of our needs, so to speak. This is one of the most powerful and healthy things that a human being can achieve. And I would submit even further, that based on my limited experience, if people had that, it would be the remedy of most maladies. Physical also, but definitely psychological. If you had that confidence to know, every day, I have something that I can contribute today, that is one of the healthiest things that you can do for a human psyche. And very often when I meet people in different situations, as I said, it's difficult to start at that point, but the root of it would be if they had a fulfilling activity that really fed them in the sense where they felt valued, they felt that they have much to give. And I'm not talking here on quantity, much meaning even to one person and so on, that would preempt many problems. Many problems. Once you don't have that, and then you get into the problems, it's not just easy to just to reset the clock. But it is a critical component of the human spirit, the idea that you are to produce. Now, the question the Talmud has is what that production consists of. Is it Torah, is it prayer, or is it hard work? But amal doesn't mean hard physical labor. Amal means production. It means effort. It means exertion. So there's an interesting Zohar. It's actually a very cryptic Zohar. The Zohar speaks about the enslavement of the Jews, the bondage of the Jews in Egypt. And the Torah in its Shmos in Exodus begins and says that when Pharaoh and the Egyptians felt threatened, became jealous of the Jewish growth, they decided they're going to, in a wily way, manipulate them and ultimately turn them into slaves. And they did that. And it says, once he began to pass different laws, he passed on that the Jews have to work, it says the expression is with hard labor, in bechemer or belevenim, with bricks and mortar. In those days, to make bricks and mortar was a lot of hard work. They had to take straw and mix it, and this. It's the whole way of creating cement. And began to build pisim v'ramses, they call it. Whether it's the pyramids or sphinxes or whatever it is that they built, the things that don't stand today, they don't stand today. When the Egyptians were going through the Arab Spring or whatever they call it today, the Arab Winter, so the joke going around was that the Jews in Israel sent a telegram to the Egyptians, listen, we know you're creating revolution and turning over the whole country, so don't destroy the pyramids because we're not coming back to build them again for you. So the Jews, it says, which is interesting. Why would the Torah tell us exactly what they were building, bricks and mortar? Why do we need to know? So the Zohar, the cryptic Zohar I refer to, makes a statement like this. It says, "B'chaymer l'bilvenim." He says, "Chaymer da kal v'chaymer," and levenim da libun hilchas, which means the following. Chaymer literally means bricks, but chaymer also has in Hebrew means also chaymer, stringency, stringent chaymer, like a chumrah. You say chumrah. So the Talmud has, in the different methodologies used in studying Talmud, one of them, we say in the morning prayer, is called kal v'chaymer. Kal v'chaymer means is a way of deriving from a more lenient case, you can derive a conclusion about more serious case, which is a method used in the legal system. That if you want to, you can extrapolate from a more lenient case. If so and so is the law in a more lenient case, you can say it's definitely the law in a harsher situation. So let's say Shabbos is called Shabbos, Yom Kippur is called double Shabbos. So a law that would apply to Shabbos would definitely apply to Yom Kippur because it's a double Shabbos. So the Zohar says that's what chaymer means, not bricks, but kal v'chomer, the study of this kal v'chomer. And levenim, which means mortar, bricks and mortar. Levenim also comes from the word libun, which means crystallization. It's talking about the crystallization of an idea. After you struggle with back and forth arguments, you come to a crystallized conclusion. So this is strange. How does the Zohar suddenly see in the word bricks and mortar, which means physical slave labor, talking about these lofty ideas of how you the methodology of how the mind works? And the answer is very simple, but also very profound. A human being is created to labor. We have to produce. It's part of the psyche and part of the healthy expression of your soul and its unique skills. The choice you have is whether it's going to be in bricks and mortar, or is it going to be exertion in study of Torah and the methodology of kal v'chomer and libun hilchos. And when you choose a more loftier type of effort, in a way, God protects you. You don't need to then immerse yourself in a more crasser form of effort. So it's about production. It's about how a person produces. A person is a creator, similar to God himself, that you have what to give. Which you can say is an achievement. Why is that an achievement? Because you could say we're human beings, we're mortals, we're vulnerable. How much can we really give? We're constantly needy. We have all kinds of needs. Nope, and God said, I've given you the opportunity to be able to be a giver. And that is what is the dignity of a human being, the ability to produce, the ability to give. Question is where that's going to be applied. So when someone says, I feel drained, what most people really mean by that is that, my life is wearing me down, day after day, week after week, whether it's work, whether it's home, whether it's relationships, whether it's just the burdens of existential challenges. And you throw into the equation all our psychological issues from childhood on, from our memories, from our earliest memories and beyond. There's a lot that can weigh us down. So yes, there are definitely times of lightness that we all have, especially when you have someone in your life. Someone loves you, you love someone. The love tends to what's the word called? Blunt the edges, makes things a little easier. But when things are not so easy, when you don't feel there's someone there for you, life can be extremely difficult. Yes, draining is a word, maybe there's even harsher words. And you almost feel like you're underwater, you feel like, how am I going to get out of this thing? And it's true, when a person is in that type of desperate place, it's very difficult to talk to them. You could also go back to that book in Exodus. What does it say? When Moses came to speak to the people and said, I'm here to redeem you, it says they couldn't even hear him because of their hard work and their shortness of breath. Because when they're in the process of being drained and overwhelmed, it's very difficult to hear that someone's here to help. So, I don't have a solution. Even in Egypt, Moses didn't have a solution. The good news is, it doesn't remain that way. Even if at times it's hard for us to hear, we all have moments of respite. And finally, Moses did get through, because it's not 24/7. There are difficult times, it's true. If you're talking to someone, you see they're completely distracted, overwhelmed. You can try to shake them up, but sometimes that's not the time. You have to wait for the door when the door opens. You have to wait for the opportunity. But an opportunity always comes. And then, it's like throwing that rope, what I said before. We can't redeem ourselves. So the real challenge is not to try to solve the problem by the forces that caused the problem in the first place. So, what caused you to feel so drained? What caused you to feel so overwhelmed? Because you've been doing things and have accumulated, and now suddenly it's getting too much. So who's going to solve this? The same person who chose to do all these things. There's only one way to change things is by having a different attitude. You have to really figure out not only what you should be doing, but what are those priorities. It's not about freeing ourselves from efforts. It's about knowing where to put the effort in too. Now it's true. I've read many books and articles. People say, thank God that people have to go to work or else we'd all kill each other. Imagine you stayed home all day with your spouse. Even as it is, it's difficult. Here, at least, you go work. Most people do more time at work than they are at home. And in a way, it's a balance. Not good to be on top of each other's throats, at each other's throats. Others say, work keeps you busy, or else people would just be going to war. What would we do if we were just free? Which brings me back to paradise. What happened to Adam, the tragedy of Adam and Eve, was not that they went from a life of comfort and ease to a life of difficulty. They went from a life of spiritual difficulties involved in spiritual challenges to a life of difficulties involved in material challenges. That was what happened. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people who grew up in traditional homes, Shomer Shabbos homes, where they kept Shabbos, and tell me, Shabbos was the worst day in the week. Some people tell beautiful things about Shabbos, but I've heard plenty of the negative. And what was so terrible about it? They said it was a day where you did nothing. You did nothing. Friday night, you sat around a table. My father would fall asleep at a certain time. They would always argue at the same place. Once in a while. It became a routine of doing nothing. You couldn't wait till Shabbos is over. I've heard this from people who grew up in very strong Shomer Shabbos homes. I developed a theory based on that maybe Saturday Night Fever is a bunch of repressed Jews who decided that, when Shabbos is over, after Havdalah, they go to party, because it's commensurate. All week, all day, 24 hours, you're repressed, and then, in the secular world, you don't have that. Why Sunday and Saturday night? Why not? Friday night is also party night, but not as much as Saturday night. It has that name, Saturday Night Live, Saturday Night Fever, whatever it is. Robin, you can check in the research that and tell me if it has any Jewish roots. It's like spring cleaning. They say it comes from Pesach cleaning. Who knows? Look, the fact is that there's a lot of Jews have been around, so I'm sure it's affected the culture. The Last Supper was a Seder, Passover Seder. Palm this and palm that comes from the Sukkahs, from Sukkah, from the palm branch, the lulav. So it's sad to hear when you hear this, of course. My life, thank God, Shabbos was actually probably the best day of the week. Not because there was no work, because it was an exciting day. It was spiritually dynamic. You asked me before about what I did for many years. That's what I did on Shabbos. Shabbos, I was the Shomer Shabbos that worked on Shabbos more than I did 6 days of the week. Because to remember these hours of talks, trust me, is a hard exertion. But it's not physical exertion in the sense of getting your hands dirty and sweating, even though that was also required sweat, but it was exertion of the mind, concentration. And that is exactly what we were created for. So Adam and Eve, paradise was not paradise as if they did nothing and they counted the butterflies in the Garden of Eden. Anyway, I've never read about butterflies in the Garden of Eden, but it would have been a nice scenario, But no, they were of the L'shomer. God says, I created you to serve and to protect. This is before the tree of knowledge. To serve and to protect. And that's sometimes referred to the positive mitzvahs, the negative ones. It was to grow spiritually. And growing spiritually by a motivated human being takes a lot of work. A lot of work. Getting over your own challenges. As a matter of fact, in many ways, when we talk about the messianic times, so you say, okay, then there will no longer be an evil inclination. There won't be the material burdens. Maimonides says The world will be filled with material delights, which some can even imagine today. At some point, if once people get over the hump of those that have more and have less, if wealth was distributed equally, there would be no poverty in the world. But I'm not suggesting socialism here. I'm talking about self-imposing it. So what would we be doing? Well, there's a challenge to, for example, break a bad habit. Everyone can relate to, even though it's not easy to do, but it's a bad habit. I'll work hard at breaking a bad habit and develop a good habit. But to break a good habit, to get to a better habit, that's far harder, much harder. Because it's good. Why would I change it? But someone who's truly dedicated to growth, for them, the effort to go from a healthy state to even more healthy state is as important as going from an unhealthy state to a healthy one. But we live in a world where often health is seen as the absence of illness, just like love is seen as the absence of war. And some say faith is the absence of reason. That's not correct. The word shalom in Hebrew is not just peace as absence of war. Peace is a state of completion, of completeness, of wholesomeness, of fulfillment. But when you live in a world where where the standards get lowered because there's so much dysfunctionality, for us sometimes, just the fact that I don't have war is already for me a great achievement. I mentioned this. Someone once told me, for me, I've come to a point, he said to me, Rabbi, that for me a good day is that I didn't have any disaster happening. So it's sad to hear that. That means that what's happened. And I asked him, was that always that way? When you were like 10 years old, you also felt that way? No. But then we come to a point where we start, the realities of life begin to affect us. So it becomes damage control is already a success story. Well, what we learned to study in the Torah about Adam and Eve, and also in the future, is that the goal here is not just to go to a beach and just say, oh, you know what, let's just be comfortable. It's to be able to focus our energies toward higher growth. Now, I know this is not something that's necessarily appealing to any of us, because we've become so jaded and so affected by society, that for us, vacation means vacation. I want to vacate. I want to empty my life. I don't want to fill my life. And it also tells us how little we know about spiritual growth and how pleasurable it could be. Because when we hear, it takes effort, the word effort has become almost like a curse word. Even though in school we get marked for effort, etc., etc. But the word effort is connected to exertion. Exertion is connected to having to work hard. We always dream in the middle of a project, the project will be over and then I don't have to do anything. And don't get me wrong, again, I'm not depriving anyone of that type of sensation. But don't think that's you at your best. That's you resting the machine. And that should be done. But don't think this is like the ultimate goal. So the Talmud says, Talmudic Statement, ein lehem menucha lo be'elam hazeh v'lo be'elam haba. Tzaddikim, righteous people, scholars, don't have peace, not in this world, not in the world to come. Is that something anyone would like to look forward to? So who needs to be a tzaddik if that's the case, right? I'd rather not be one and have peace. But there's a question. There's another place the Mishnah says that in the future, it'll be Yom Shekolei Shabbos u'Menucha l'Chayalam. It'll be a day that is a period, an era, that'll be complete Shabbos and Menucha, complete peace. The same word, Ein La Menucha, Kulei Shabbos and Menucha. How do you reconcile the two? It's talking about the same period in time. So one of the answers given, which is a beautiful answer, is for a person who is healthy spiritually and healthy psychologically, they are at peace with not having peace. That's the point. So there's two ways that you could have lack of peace. One is that you're anxious, that you're restless in a negative way. You're nervous, you're, what's the word for it? No peace, no inner peace, no calm, no serenity. Then there's another one that comes from a very healthy place. They shouldn't be confused. A very healthy person is also restless. But that restlessness is not due because they're lacking something, it's because they have everything, but they see so much more. And the horizons are what motivate them. That story of the Tzemach Tzedek, I quoted in the book Torah Meaningful Life, in the first chapter. The first chapter is called Body and Soul. Body and soul. So I used the example from the verse in Mishlei and in Proverbs. Ner Hashem nishma Sodom. The soul of the lamp of the flame of God is the soul of a human being. In the book of Ecclesiastes, the expression goes, the spirit of the animal descends, the spirit of man, of the human, rises. You look at, like one of the Rebbes once said, an animal has never seen heaven. Animals walk on all four. It's not just a physiological thing. It's because their physiology is aligned with their psyches. Their psyches also look down. They look at the grass. They look at the prey. They look at their young. They're here to survive. They're here to protect. They're here to breed, to perpetuate the species. They're not here to dream, to look up into the heavens. So God didn't make them in a way where their eyes go up to heaven. Human being walks upright. Raise your eyes to heaven and see who created you. Because we walk upright, we see the heavens. And even on a very basic level, look what that has done. That's created a billion, if not $1 trillion industry called NASA, the space industry. Just for one reason, because we're curious. If you ask animals, why aren't you interested about what's going on the moon or on Mars? Now Mars has become the latest thing. They probably say it's because I have enough trouble right here figuring out what to do on this earth. You know, I've shared with you my as a hardcore New Yorker experience with nature. You know, we don't see nature that much. I mean, I know they give us a little nature here. We have Central Park and so on. But you know, like in the city, basically a tree has to be given permission, so they have to carve out of the concrete a place where you plant a tree. Once upon a time ago, it was the other way around. But so I went upstate, and I was intrigued by these cows grazing years ago. So I decided to stop by and just study them. And it was an unbelievable experience. No neurosis. They have no therapists. No need for it. And they could just sit there and graze in the grass all day long. Nothing changes. And then the next day. They're not looking for new iPhones or iPads. They're not looking to build better habitats. They don't need to go shopping. They don't have cars. They don't smoke. You know, they don't watch TV, internet, none of these issues. They also don't digress from their clockwork. They do exactly what they were created. So they don't go up, they don't go down. And then there's us human beings. So the answer is because the spirit of man rises, looks up, like a flame. The soul of a human being is a flame. What's a flame? Look at a flame. It's the approximation of what your soul is like. It's, number one, never at rest. It's always flickering. Number two, it's always licking the air. It's always looking to go up. The only thing that defies gravity to our physical eye is a flame. And so many other things. A flame illuminates. A flame warms. A flame lights another flame without being diminished. Everything that's spiritual is captured in a flame. That's why we watch flames. Hanukkah, Shabbos, even in sad times when you light a flame for a yard site. Yizkor flame. Because a flame is a neshama. That's what your soul looks like. In a child, just look at a child. Put a child on the ground. They don't stop. They will not stop for 1 second. Unless something human freezes them or some machine, like a television or something. On their own, it's restless spirit exploring the world. And that's what's right now inside of you. Except as we grow older, just like our arteries harden, the flame gets weakened. Not that the part of the flame burns, but the body subdues it, quiets it. So the body is like the wick, and the flame is the flame. So that story with the Tzemach Tzedek, he was once, as a child, climbing a ladder with his friends. They all climbed halfway up, quarter way up, 3/4 of the way, but not to the top. He climbed all the way to the top. So his grandfather, noticing it, the Alter Rebbe said to him, Valatanya, why were you the only one that had the courage to climb to the top? So he said, simple Zayda. Grandpa, he said. Because when the other children were climbing, they were climbing, they kept looking down. So they saw how high they were. They got afraid. They were afraid. They were not accustomed to being so high. So they ran back down, scampered back down to the ground, where they hung out. That's where they are used to. When I climbed, I kept looking up. So I climbed higher. Simple answer from not such a simple boy. But that's the choice we have all the time. You hang around with people that have accomplished less than you, guaranteed it's going to bring you down. Because you'll say, hey, your ego will say, look how much I've done compared to those losers. Or whatever you call them. Maybe that's too harsh. But you hang around with people that have accomplished more than you, there's a certain healthy jealousy. Kina sofrim tarba chachma. It motivates you, to want to do more. So the spirit is a constantly growing thing. Talmidei Chacham, they have no peace. They're at peace with no peace. They are climbing horizons. They're like mountain climbers. Why would they want to stop? You have to stop because you need to rest. We are human beings after all. When God was teaching Moses the Torah, it says there are spaces where God stopped so Moses could absorb. Because we can't, we need to absorb. The Rebbe would also stop, so we have been able to absorb after 45 minutes, an hour, and so on. It's always, but the teachers are commensurate to the students. So Moses was a great student, but he had a greater teacher. So there's pauses. So pauses are also part of the growth, remember. When you pause in order to gather strength, it's not, you're going back to your natural place of just doing nothing. You're pausing in order to grow further. That's how a healthy person thinks. So it's true, everyone should have the pleasure after you finish a project. You worked hard, by all means you should enjoy the fruits of your labor. And at least one morning, sleep a little longer. But don't ever think that's the goal. That's you taking a breather in order to climb further. And that takes a lot of exertion, that climbing. There's a story with the Robzera. I've shared it here. It's an amazing story to me because it's like you see what means a person dedicated to growth. We all like to think we're open-minded people and we always want to grow. Out of the box. Well, listen to this story. You tell me, by contrast, where you stand. Robzera was a great, great scholar. And he mastered, there were two academies then, called the Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi. Right after the first temple was destroyed. And then later, the second temple, when the Talmud began to be developed and began to be written down, so there were two academies, primary academies. One was in Babylon, was today modern-day Iraq, and the other was in Jerusalem. So one's called the Jerusalem Academy, and there was the Babylonian one. The Babylonian Academy was a larger one and also lasted longer, and the Babylonian Talmud is far bigger and far more extensive than the Jerusalem Talmud. But there's much overlap, so the Jerusalem Talmud, it's a much smaller Talmud than the Babylonian. It says Rabzera, after mastering the Babylonian Talmud, he decided he wants to now start studying the Jerusalem Talmud. And he fasted 100 fasts in order to forget the Talmud Babylonian, in order to learn the Jerusalem Talmud. The big question immediately jumps out. Since when do you have to forget knowledge to acquire knowledge? Knowledge is accumulative. Well, why would he want to forget it? You want to learn more? Fine, so go to a new school and learn more. So you have to forget what you learned in the previous school. In addition to the fact that in the specific prohibition, you're not supposed to forget what you study Torah. Considered like an insult to God. Deliberately to go and forget. And the answer is equally brilliant. The answer is, he didn't want to forget what he had learned. He wanted to forget the methodology. The Babylonian methodology was a particular methodology. He wanted to learn a new methodology. Obviously, he wasn't interested in forgetting what he had learned, knowledge. So his fasting was to forget that methodology. Now tell me, how many people who have developed and mastered a methodology want to forget that methodology to gain a new methodology? They say that today, by the time you're age 8, you've already developed a microcosm, all the ways you're going to solve problems, how you think, and so on. By age 8, you don't see it yet. But age 8, you develop the habits, whether it's from school or from parents or whatever it is, how you're going to solve problems or not solve problems. That's what they say, because the mind then has already become shaped. Doesn't mean you're stuck there. But when we develop, someone comes to you and says to you, you know what, you have a flawed way of thinking. You jump to conclusions, or you think in a crooked way. That's also hard to hear. But if you're an honest person and you respect the person who's telling this to you, at some point you say, maybe there's a point, and you'll go to say, okay, what can I do to correct my way of thinking? What would you suggest? That is an achievement. But someone should come and tell you, you know something? You think very straight. You have very good methodology. But if you want to grow, you have to forget this methodology and learn a whole new methodology. How many of us would want to do that? We have our mindsets. Why would we want to do that? But that's what a person who's looking for, whose soul is restless and wants to find the highest levels of excellence. And good is not enough. They want excellence. So I know for many of us will say, I'm so happy if I could just get from bad to good. We'll deal with the good to excellence later. It's correct. You may be correct technically, but don't think that you should stop there. Even when you're going from bad to good, think about excellence. And this brings me back to the being drained. The answer to the question of being drained is not, how do I free myself and now not to work hard? No, you know what you have to do? You have to learn to work hard in healthy things. That's how you stop getting drained. People who work hard in good, healthy things that are important are not drained, even though they may be working harder than the person who's being drained, because what they're working for is not about that type of investment. There's a whole different motivation involved. As I said, if you see diamonds, you'll be able to achieve a lot more. The thing is, you don't see the diamonds. So then it's a battle. Okay, how much do I work? How much don't I work? I'll work or will I kill myself in my work in overexertion and so on and so forth. But this is easier said than done, because this requires really rethinking your work, rethinking where you really put most effort in. So there's an expression that we are told that just like Shabbos is a mitzvah, we also have a mitzvah to work 6 days of the week. I don't know if you know that part. Some people only know the first part. It says, Sheishes yom tasa malachtecha. 6 days you shall work. That's a mitzvah. It's a free says that's a mitzvah. And the 7th day shall be Shabbos. You shall take off from material work. 39 labors. Now lamates malachas that they did in the temple we don't do. But it says in the Mishnah, interestingly, it says like this. It says, Aboy malachas chaser achas. There are 40 types of work. Like what's prohibited to do on Shabbos? So we derive from the Torah, because it compares the building of the Mishkan with Shabbos, comes together in the chapter of Vayakel. So it says, we learn from that the Mishkan had what defined work? Whatever was done in the Mishkan, in the temple, that was defined work. And that tells us what we're not supposed to be doing on Shabbos. But the expression the Talmud says is Arboim melachas chaser achas, which means 40 types of work, missing one. What kind of expression is that? Why don't you just say 39? What does 40 minus 1 mean? That's the expression. And it's not the only time the Talmud uses such expressions. The answer is, the Medrash says, because there's a 40th work. The 40th is not material labor, it's spiritual labor. It's called Malachas Shamayim. It's called the work of heaven. So Shabbos, we're freed of the 39, so you can do the 40th. But the 40th, the difference between the 40th and the 39 is, do you go out of yourself to do that work? All 39 are symbolized by one thing. You're going out of your own soul to achieve something. And all those works, you build something, you weave something, you light something, you distinguish something, you carry something. It's all about interacting with the world outside of you. The work of Shabbos is the work within you. So if you shut down all your material activities, what would you be left with? You'd be left with yourself. Soul work. That's not easier work than the outer work. As a matter of fact, for some people it's far harder because they have no idea what their soul is like. You give them a hammer and nail, they know what to do. You give them a typewriter, a computer, they know what to do. Give them a soul, everything is taken away, it can be terrifying because we're not used to it. But that's far harder work. I wish those children, those people growing up in Shabbos would grow up in a home. Shabbos is not a day when we do nothing. Shabbos is the day when you do everything. And you empower yourself to be able to go back now to the outside world and bring that soulful energy. That's the meaning of Shabbos. So 6 days of the week, not 6 days of Shabbos and 1 day work. 6 days work because the purpose of creation, the purpose of existence, because God wants us to create a home for the divine in this material world. So our primary activity is producing outside of ourselves. That's our work. But the focus, the purpose of it all, is not that's just the means. The end of it all is the Shabbos experience, which is the sanctity, the soulful work. But we have not been trained. I just was meeting a group of educators who they said to me, if they have the opportunity to influence the Board of Education, I'm talking about the secular Board of Education, and to deal with preschool and so on, what would I suggest they do? So hands down, I said one thing. We have to teach our children that they have a soul and that they have an indispensable contribution to make. This doesn't have to be a religious message. It doesn't have to be a Jewish message. It's a universal message. Because children naturally are soulful. It's we turn them into adults, we turn them into efficient machines. A child is naturally musical, naturally artistic. One of the TED conference talks, there's a British psychologist, education psychologist, makes the case that elementary school, the word elementary comes from the people who developed the education system that the Western world embraces today, including us here, was formulated by Napoleon and Frederick the Great in order to create efficient soldiers. That's why the word elementary is rooted in some military term. And that's why mathematics, science, the hard, efficient tools, the tool chest, art and music, he makes the case there. And he's not talking religious, he's talking completely from an educational point of view. He says children are all extracurricular activities. Sport, music and art are not considered to be requirements. They're considered, these are the hobbies, or whatever we call them. He says we're basically destroying the souls of our children by turning them into this efficient thing. It's like giving someone a tool chest, and they don't know what to use. So they're excellent. They know how to knock in nails. They know how to use screwdrivers. They know how to use a wrench. But what do you use it for? And I could say the same thing as in our Jewish education system. This has to be inundated to children because they're going to have plenty of challenges when they enter the material world. You're not a material human being having a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being having a material experience. That is, if every child learned that, I have no doubt that as adults, it'll be a whole different type of life. And you begin young, because this is every day, every parent should be telling this to their child. Every morning you say, Modani, remember, your soul is the center of your life. The material is the platform. That's the arena where you express your soul. So Shabbos is once a week. Weekdays is where you express it. But what happens is, we've now become a world where material is the key, and the spiritual is like a hobby. Once in a while, when we have nothing to do, or when we're down, or when there's a crisis, so we have a spiritual awakening. Because the material isn't working. In truth, it's the other way around. So, to talk about effort, the real effort is in spiritual effort. But we're not trained, we're not taught this. I include myself, I was not taught this. I learned this later. And when you learn it, you just realize it's all upside down. That's what we should be taught. Your main efforts should be, there's an expression, belay lev alev. Work diligently, work hard, be ethical, and so on. But always reserve a little of your soul that's beyond your work. That's the key. If you become your work and your work becomes you, and when someone asks you, who are you, you give them your business card instead of telling them, I'm a soul trapped in a body or whatever. That's tells you right away how we identify ourselves. So the Torah does not in any way sees work as admirable. It sees it as a job, and even after the curse, even after Adam was said, with the sweat of your brow you'll eat bread, then the job is now go out and sweat, but never forget the purpose. There's an interesting Parsha Bahar where it talks about the sabbatical, the Shemitah year. So the Torah says like this, that Kisovi, when you will come to the land, Israel, promised land, you shall keep V'shav Sa'aret Shabbos L'Hashem. You shall rest the land, it should be a Shabbos to God. And then the Torah continues. 6 years you shall plow and prune the land and the vineyards and so on. And the seventh day will be Shabbos. That's exactly the order. So the question is asked, Alter Rebbe asked this question. First of all, the order is first 6 years and then comes Shabbos. Then comes the sabbatical. So why does the Torah begin right away saying Shabbos and then 6 days and then it repeats Shabbos again? Why? There's redundancy. And his answer is also unbelievable lesson in life. Because the first thing the Torah is telling us is the mission, the purpose. You'll come to the land. The purpose is not plowing and pruning the land. The purpose is V'shavsa, is to turn it into a divine place. Now begins the process. Now the hard, painstaking process. 6 years you work, and that leads you to the seventh day. There's a disagreement in the Talmud about Shabbos between Hillel and Shammai. It says, the two sets of the Ten Commandments. One is in the book of Exodus in Yisro, and one is in another set of commandments is repeated again in Veschanon, in the book of Numbers. Deuteronomy. And there's this few distinctions between the same exactly 10 commandments, but by Shabbos there's a distinction. In the first one it says Zocher es Yom HaShabbos, remember Shabbos. The second one says Shomer, protect. So that the Talmud says both were set together, Zocher v'Shomer b'divrechon and so on, but it's two different emphases. Based on Zocher, what's the difference? Shomer means when the Shabbos comes, protect it, meaning preserve it. Zocher can be interpreted not just when the Shabbos comes, you don't have to remember it. That's when it's there. That all week long you have to remember it. So it says Shammai would all week long think about Shabbos, that when he saw special food or he saw a special thing, he put it away, even if it was Sunday. This is something for Shabbos. Hillel said each day you have to work in that day, and if whatever comes, the gifts you have that day, use them for that day. They're both spiritual objectives. The question only is, which is the focus? So to go back to our whole take on labor and on vacation, on effort, needs to be revisited. Work and exertion is a very healthy thing. It means it's the ability for you to produce. The question is where those efforts are going. Are they going in material work, which frankly is always going to be temporary, or is it going to something that's eternal? When you work hard, is there a harder job than being a mother of children? Completely underappreciated in our time. It's actually, it was dismissed. Mothers have difficulties with holding the job, because it doesn't bring money in. It's no bottom line. That's the only reason it's looked upon. If it's only money. Take money out of the equation, it would be considered the most noble thing you can do. As a matter of fact, the people who look down on it, what would they be like if their mothers didn't spend time with them? Well, maybe that's why they're like that, because their mothers didn't spend time with them. So, however you twist it. The point is that hard work? Yes, it's very hard work. Is it hard work in the same sense of a construction worker, or do you sweat as much? You sweat more. But it's hard work that goes into planting a seed called love. So love takes work. And that's a healthy thing. I don't mean work overcoming the difficulties and going to therapy and dealing with betrayal and lies and deception. I'm not talking about that part of it. I'm talking about the hard work in a healthy relationship. It's hard work to develop, cultivate your soul in this world. It's hard work. We live in a world that does everything possible to extinguish our souls. It focuses on immediate goals, instant gratification. Money itself, from a Torah point of view, is a blessing. But only when you understand that it has a soul. Take away the soul of money, and it's the most destructive force. For that matter, take away the soul of anything, and it becomes a destructive force. Take away the soul from sexuality. Take away the soul of love. Take away the soul of anything, of technology. Then it becomes a weapon. What do I mean by soul? I don't mean soul not in the literal sense. It means the spirit, the deeper purpose, the way it serves, the way it brings light. Think of the flame. Take all these things and turn them into a flame that illuminates, that warms, that flickers, that's restless in growth, and you have yourself a healthy force. Turn it into a static, dead element, which materialism is by definition, and you have dead weight, if not worse. And so there we're dealing with that challenge. So I would suggest, of course it's case by case. I mentioned talking to a mentor, to a friend. You're feeling drained? Yes. If you think the immediate thing to do is to take off some jobs, fine, do that. I don't think that's going to be your long-term solution. The long-term solution is find something to do that has real meaning, something that is giving, and put more work in that, more effort in that than the other work that you're doing that's draining you. You tell me whether you still feel drained. That's what I would suggest. It's not about just unloading, it's about rechanneling, redirecting our energies. I've taken upon myself certain things, especially in the last year or two, that, trust me, they're difficult, but they don't drain me. They give me a lot of energy. I wake up in the morning, I give a class now, and I am based for an hour and a half. It's a new thing. I never thought, would I have an hour and a half in the day every day? But I'm doing it. It's a labor of love. And I'm falling behind, frankly. It's making me crazy about the summaries and so on and so forth. But it's good crazy. Better than being crazy about other things that have no benefits, just agonizing. So I bless you all to agonize. But agonize over spiritual growth. And trust me, that's empowering. It's not draining. Try it out. Worry about how you're going to help somebody tomorrow. And worry strongly, and you'll trust me, it'll be a better worry than all the other worries. And it will weaken anything that drains you. It'll empower you. Because the soul loves challenge. It loves growth. It loves to go higher and higher. It's the body that's lazy. It's the body that just wants to be a couch potato. And the question is, who's going to run the show? So yes, if you go with a body mentality, then yes, of course it's easier just not to do anything. Let's just do nothing today. But if you go with a soul mentality, you want to do a lot. Just not focus purely on bodily interests and material interests. As I said, all these ideas are easier said. Implementing them are more difficult. But if you take these words to heart, I have no doubt everybody can implement. It's just a matter of wanting to do it and applying yourself to it. So, as Labor Day comes, maybe something to think about when you're not going to work. What are you doing, with your life? What work are you doing? And I really feel that every person here can benefit from committing to maybe partnering with someone else, learning together. Doesn't mean you both can teach each other. I'm not talking about necessarily feeling that I'm the big teacher or something, but everybody can do something that will help someone else and help you in return. And many other ideas where you can apply and take upon yourself something of that nature. And I know, as I began the class, you could say, well, I'm so busy as it is, how can I start something new? Well, so give busy people, you'll be able to fit it in, like the first lesson of the time management. But more importantly, if you understand the value of it, what it'll help do is actually relieve you of pressures, not add pressure. If it's the right commitment. If it's the wrong one, then it will add pressure. So let's think a little, thinking out of the box. This is a little different approach, perhaps, and something that each of us can definitely do, especially as we stand in the month of Elul, as I mentioned. And I should also say that this is the theme of this week's chapter in the Torah, because the Torah starts this week's Kiseitze l'milchama alevecha, when you go out to war, to wage war, upon your enemies. And as I've discussed in previous years, the emphasis kiseitze, meaning you're going out. That means the war is not inside of you. That's out in the material world. And then also avecha alevecha, you are above your enemy. You're always beyond and above. That's the key thing, is to realize that the material world around us, our work, the gifts we were given, the instruments, are just that. They're instruments for you, the artist, to paint a spiritual picture. Don't ever think the instrument is the end and you're the means. It's the other way around. So you're given instruments, you're given tools, you're given your job, you're given the work you do, whatever it is that your particular skills are. But that's the canvas, that's the platform, that's the arena. And the key is to direct it to start things towards spiritual goals. That's where the real work is. And the rest, you do what you have to do in order to obviously survive, but never confuse. You turn the means into the end and the end into the means, that gets very problematic on many, many levels. I want to say that this class is dedicated to a good friend Philip, in honor of his father's Yortzeit, Naftali ben Eliyahu, and the Yud Elul, right? The 10th of Elul. And in the spirit, in the merit of this discussion, may the spirit of his father elevate and also give him power, Philip and everyone else that needs blessings in the same particular way. It's already custom as well in the month of Elul to wish everyone a Ksiva Chsimateva, which is a blessed year. But that for sure, that God can do as He does right in giving everyone their blessed year. The question is what we do, what our part is, in the efforts we make. And that's part of the discussion here, is what we can do in this month of Elul as we prepare the ground. As I mentioned in the previous weeks, Ani l'daidi v'daidi li. We initiate. Love has to be initiated. And that's also part of the giving process, that you are a creator, a producer, a giver. You have plenty to give, and you'll only know it when you begin doing it. It's like any type of exercise. You don't know those muscles until you use them. So everyone should be blessed to be able to produce properly, effectively, and may have many, many challenges and exertions, but all in the spiritual realm. And that will diminish our need to have to exert and find and agonize in the material realm. I will also announce that we have the book 60 Days here, which many people find helpful as a part of this journey, the Elul journey. We also send out a daily email. If you don't get that, if any of you do not give us your email address, please do so. Philip will not be giving his class tomorrow, okay? And I will be continuing this journey next Wednesday, please God. And until then, may everyone travel well and only healthy restlessness. Thank you very much.